Hello and welcome to Lightmap from SIFTER. On Lightmap, we explore what it takes to make video games and interactive media from creative teams all around the world. You'll meet new developers, artists, musicians, researchers, and more. My name is Pauletto. Our guest on Lightmap this week is Jeff Van Dyck, BAFTA award-winning composer and sound designer, whose work you'd know from UNPACKING, FIFA and NHL, Hand of Fate, Alien Isolation, and many, many more. Hi, Jeff.
Thanks, man. It's awesome to be here.
I can't wait to learn more about the world of sound you create. Before we get into that, though, let's find out what's making the news this week with the top stories on the latest episode of Walkthrough, SIFTER's news podcast. Hi, I'm Pauletto.
And I'm Fiona Bartholomaeus.
And here are the top stories this week on Walkthrough, SIFTER's weekly news podcast for Sunday, 25th of September.
A massive hack of Rockstar has revealed an in-progress look at GTA 6.
Our Mellow developers, League of Geeks, are working on a new strategy game called Solium Infernum.
Logitech's G Cloud handheld is officially announced and it's very expensive.
And Tiny Tina's Wonderlands was so successful, Gearbox are making it into a franchise.
You can get every episode of Walkthrough for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on our website sifter.com.au, or wherever you like to listen every Sunday.
So tell us, how did you first get involved with the team at Witchbeam?
Okay, well, first of all, we all used to work at a company called Sega in Brisbane, which used to be called the Creative Assembly Australia. It was a subset of Creative Assembly, the Total War developers. Creative Assembly was bought by Sega, and I met Sanatan Mishra and Tim Dawson at Sega, and we all worked there together on Sega games or Total War games, and then at some point we didn't, and we all went our different ways or whatever, and then through sort of a chance meeting I bumped into Sanatan, who I'll refer to as Nart because that's his nickname, Nart, and I bumped into Nart in the Valley in Brisbane, and he said, "Hey Jeff, come and check out this game we're doing. We've gone indie. We left Sega, and we're doing this game." And I went over to their place a couple days later, and I played this game that they called Assault Android Cactus, and I really enjoyed the game. It was really action-packed twin stick shooter. And they said, "Well, so we're looking for somebody to do the music and sound, and we know you know lots of people. So who would you recommend to do the music and sound in our game?" And I said, "Well, what about me? I'd love to work on the music and sound in this game." And they said, "Oh, we couldn't afford you. You know, you're doing like big AAA stuff." And I went, "Well, no, because I mean, I respect what you guys are doing here. You're putting your lives on the line, going indie. You're doing this for no money, except for the potential of making some money in the future if the game does well. Why don't I join forces with you, and I'll share that risk with you and see where this goes? Because I believed in the game and I believed in them." And so that was when Witchbeam was formed with the three of us. And yeah, so that was probably, that game released in 2015, I think. And yeah, so we've been business partners since, probably 2012 or 2013 or something like that. Yeah, that's how I met them. At that time of my life, I was kind of transitioning from AAA to indie. And I started working on contract with some indies, but other indies were in a similar boat to Nart and Tim, and I was able to become partners with a few other indies as well for the same reasons and similar benefits. So I'm involved with a few different indie companies. And yeah, it's worked out really well. I prefer it than working on contract for people because it's easier to just sort of pour your heart into things and not have to worry about kind of keeping an eye on the amount of time you're spending on things. You know what I mean? Because if you're working on contract, you got to stick to their budget and the amount of time, and you know what I mean. And whereas if you're sort of, owning part of what you're creating, there's really no limit to how much time and effort you can put into it, aside from life balance.
After working on big AAA titles, what is it about indie teams that have drawn you back?
Well, I would say, to be honest, the reason why I dropped out of the AAA stuff was they wanted, the company I was working for at the time, Sega / Creative Assembly, they wanted me to move to the UK, and I wasn't prepared to do that. I was living in the Gold Coast at the time, near Brisbane here, and yeah, so I didn't want to do that. So I kind of lost my job over that, because I didn't move over there, and so this was sort of post GFC, global financial crisis, and from the embers and the ashes, these indies were starting to form out of all of that, and so there wasn't really a lot of AAA work happening in Australia, and so that was sort of my only option, was to go in that direction, and I'm really quite glad that that was the option that was there, because if you think about it, each indie is working on a different set of games, and so for me, I've had so much diversity in what I've been working on over the last sort of 10 years or so, that if I had stuck with a larger AAA, I possibly would have been continuing to do the same thing over and over again, over year after year or so. So yeah, it's been fantastic working with indies.
And Australia is a great place to be working on indie games at the moment. So much great work coming out of here.
It is.
To take it back
so
to unpacking, what were your initial impressions of this idea when it was first pitched?
I certainly did not see it being the success that it is, which is interesting. I saw a game where you're picking things up that appear out of boxes and putting them away, and I thought, okay, I can see how this is somewhat cathartic in and if you're into organizing and tidying and feng shui and all that sort of stuff, then I could see the appeal, but I did not foresee the storytelling element of the game, and and seeing an early version of the game, obviously that didn't really exist in the early version of the game, and it wasn't until Ren Breyer and Tim Dawson started adding the new levels and explaining the items and starting to tell me the story behind the items, and the fact that there was a story behind the items. I'm like, that's a really clever idea. I thought that was a really brilliant idea, but I still thought nobody's going to notice there's a story in this game, because how could they? There's no text, there's no dialogue. How are they, and wow, I'd sold everybody short on this, because you know what I mean? Like I was, everybody's way smarter than I thought.
Yeah, the passive storytelling in it is so powerful. It doesn't need to be,
it is
all laid out in cutscenes or text on screen. People got it.
This is so true, and I think it's because of that. And first of all, everybody interprets it a little bit differently, and also because of the way they are themselves creating the story. I think it actually makes it more of an emotional connection because of that. Because they're not being fed the thing, the story. They're coming to their own conclusion what the story is. Which is, I guess, adds that deeper connection.
And you've worked on quite a broad range of genres in your career. How did your approach to composing for Unpacking differ from your previous work?
Well, actually, in some ways, it was kind of a throwback to what I used to do in the 90s, in the early 90s, because before it was called chiptunes, we used to call it video game music. And but it became a genre called chiptunes. It's a whole thing, right? When I first started working at Electronic Arts in 1992, the the music technology that I had access to was, well, if it was a PC, it was this thing called a Sound Blaster, and it had a little FM synth in it. And then we also did games for the Sega Genesis, and it had an FM synth in it. FM synth was all the rage of that time, of that era. It was, there was this keyboard that all the musicians used in the late 80s and early 90s called the DX7, and it was an FM synth, and all the songs of that era had the sound of that synth in it, and the Sega Genesis has it as well. It also has this thing called the PSG in it, and that's the pulse sign. I think that's what it stands for. Pulse sign generator. Somebody will have to correct me on that. But anyways, it makes square waves basically, and it's that classic chiptune square wave sound, right? And so while I could make interesting sounds with the FM synth, and I could even play the occasional sample, or a little drum hit or what have you, or guitar sample, the PSG only had one sound to it, and it's that sound we all know today, which is that square wave thing. So for the first part of my career, that was the only kind of stuff I wrote, because that's the only kind of stuff I could write, because of the technology. And then the CD-ROM was invented, and then we were allowed to do full production music in a full studio and hire musicians, and it all evolved from there. And then chiptunes video game music kind of went in a completely different direction. And then a couple decades later, everybody's like, hey, that music way back that you did back in the 90s, all that old arcadey sounding music sounded amazing because of the limitations you had, and like you say, you're going to chiptune concerts now, and so when Ren and Tim brought and showed me Unpacking, they said, we're thinking it's pixel art, it's we're thinking of some sort of chiptune vibe here. And I'm like, and they're like, would you like to do that? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And we listened to some other stuff that I had done, and they're like, yeah, sort of like this, a little bit like that. And it wasn't until that we combined the sound of the chiptune sound with acoustic guitar, and having that, once we had that combination, it was like, yeah, that feels right for the game. That's the chiptunes matches the pixel art look of the game, and the acoustic guitar matches the character in the game, and their story. And I guess an acoustic guitar has this sort of real, folky, sincere kind of sound to it, and it just works really well in the context of this game.
Absolutely, and a lot of the emotion that we were speaking of before that people get from the story and from the passive writing, a lot of that comes from the music cues, and it's that acoustic, warm acoustic underneath the chiptuney stuff that I think really sets it apart. What was it like to produce something in a mixture of both? Is that the first time that you've done that?
Yeah, it is actually. I found it really inspiring myself. I love mashing up genres like that. I do really enjoy it. And, in other games, I've, had to kind of go orchestral, but also electronic. And I like that combination. And I mean, again, later in the 90s, I was doing industrial music, which was like electronic music, but it's got super heavy guitars and, crazy distorted drums and what have you in it. So I do like this mashup thing, and between that and then later on in the game, I start introducing piano, and I start introducing different instruments to tie in with different characters that enter the story. And so I'm kind of relating an instrument to a character. And so at one point the piano starts making an entrance, and that has its own emotional power, So yeah, it was a pleasure to work on that sort of combined genre thing.
If we can go a little bit deeper into a track, this one is probably my favorite track on the Unpacking soundtrack. It's called Going Solo. what ideas and direction were you given by the team for this song?
So for the game in its entirety, Tim and Ren, we went through every level, and what we did is we followed this person's life, and we even mapped it out where they were living. It was all based on them living in Brisbane here. And so at each point, it's some different location in Brisbane, and it was like, this is what's happening to them here. And so I had the beats, like the story beats, for the whole game. And so we could really kind of plan out how the music should evolve. And so for going solo, the situation is that she is out of a bad relationship. She has, hopefully I'm not spoiling too much stuff here, so spoiler alert. She's gone out of a bad relationship. She has spent some time living back at her parents' place, and I went for that song, for when you go back to your parents' place. It starts with the same song that starts it's the same song from the very first level, but it's played a bit more sad, which is kind of classic. But after that level, she moves into her own apartment, and she's feeling good. I mean, feeling good would have been just as good a song title as going solo. She's feeling really good because she's figured out what's important to her. She's stayed focused on her career, and her career is doing well. And she's got her own place. She's moved out of her folks' home again. And so going solo for me was like, I wanted to just have that feeling good vibe come through right from the start. And so, yeah, when I started writing that song, I was playing around with the samples that I had for the guitar. So the guitar in Unpacking is sampled guitar. So I'm playing notes on the keyboard, but it's playing a guitar sound, and it's quite convincing.
Wow, yeah, that's a surprise actually.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what the technology can do sound wise now. Of course, like, to get it to sound ultra realistic, you have to put a lot of extra information in. So I'm not just playing a note and sitting there. Like, it is complicated. There's like, you got to set up controllers and stuff like that to try and get the best performance out of the synth. And one of the options in this particular sound is there's all the usual guitar chords being played, but they're played in different ways. Big open notes, but also muted notes, and then also some nice thumping of the acoustic body itself. And I had my speakers up pretty loud, and I was just kind of playing with the thumping sounds on the guitar body, and I found that they actually had quite a nice punch to them, where I could almost use them like a kick and snare in a drum kit. And I've actually just initially started playing it in a real basic pattern, just a 4 on the floor kind of vibe, with maybe a little bit of a shuffle to it, ever so slight. And with that being like the starting beat of the song, I was messing around with another aspect of the guitar sound. I think what I did is I loaded another guitar layer, and I was playing with the muted chords that it had, and I kind of went almost reggae with it, which is that boom, jut, 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 that kind of vibe. And I've always thought reggae had a nice uplifting mood to it. And it's not that it's not that the song is all fully reggae, but there's definitely a very uplifting vibe, and it has some of those reggae mechanics.
I think that that beat really drives it forward, and in that story section of her kind of moving on, things are going well, progression, growth. It hits really well.
it's very and I was in a really up mood at the time, and I find that my mood definitely defines how a song is going to turn out. And I was vibing it, and then I kind of went down. I tend to just sort of build things up from there. In this case, so I kind of had the thumping guitar beat. I had the reggae guitar chords going, and then I went and did a sub bass kind of bass line on there to that, and then it kind of developed almost went a bit funky, so it's like funky reggae, and I was like, yeah, this is even more uplifting now, so and then I started just having fun with melodically, and this is sort of my approach in general with writing music, is I like melodies that you could sing now, and like that are instrumental melodies, but you could also sing them out to yourself or whistle them, and I was specifically thinking, well, you hear a funky beat, you'd want to whistle a pretty uplifting melody over top of this, or and if it was a song that was supporting the moment of the game, like this, she'd be whistling because she's happy, she's unpacking into her new pad, it's all hers, and so melodically, I just decided to write something that I felt could be easily whistled, and but I used chiptune synth sounds on it, and added some harmonies and what have you. And then there's a few changes in the song where it changes to some different chords, and I am a huge fan of, I'll call them angular chord changes, where it's just something that's not just a standard, you've heard it all before. It's just like something that's just a little bit, well, it's there's a twist to it, a little bit I call it angular. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but and what that represents is there's still the little hint of fear of moving out on your own, and will you survive, and is everything going to be okay? And I didn't want that to be a really strong note in this song, but I wanted it to be there. You know what I mean? And so there's these chord changes and melodic changes that are like, I hope everything's going to be okay. You know what I mean? It's sort of asking that question. And then but the majority of the song is that it's you know feeling good. She's living on her own. So
It's an incredible attention to detail, and I think it goes a long way. Those subtle differences go a long way into people understanding that passive writing that you were surprised so many people understood. Was there any more notable ones off the top of your head from any of the other tracks where it had similar, shifts in mood or slight undertones to portray the story?
yeah, for sure. And in fact, the song from the level previous, Lost and Found, I think, is the one that I'm thinking. And that's for when she's moved back in with her parents, right? So the previous level. And there are moments in that song which represent a conversation between the main character and the partner that she is no longer with. And there's a point where it's like it's sort of back and forth, question and answer. And then at one point they start to harmonize. And my thinking here, and this is what I was reading into it, whether it comes across when you listen to it, is that the question answer is an argument. It's an argument between them, and they're saying stuff to each other back and forth. But they reach some sort of agreement, and when the melodies start to sort of harmonize and work with each other, that's them kind of going, yeah, okay, we're just not meant for each other. It wasn't meant to be, but we still kind of we can be friends. It's an amiable breakup, and Whether that's accurate or not, I'm not sure, because there's a point in that level. I think you might remember there's this point where you have to put a picture somewhere. And yeah, I don't want to spoil that. But anyways, this was what was going on in my head. And the song kind of just goes through a whole whack of moods and kind of ends on a happy note in the end. But you definitely go through like something that feels really sad, and because yeah, she's bummed. She's, the relationship's over, and she's back in her old bedroom, which is no longer hers anymore. It's like where they store the sewing machine and all that. So
That's the music side of things. I understand the sound design was quite a big project on its own. Tell me about how you went collecting all the different sounds for Unpacking.
Well, so initially, I started, like, we had obviously an item list of all the things that were in the game, and I started recording them. And I actually go into huge detail about this in a GDC talk that I did earlier this year. So I'll just plug that now. If you're really interested in this, I go into great detail, and it was earlier this year in March. So if you want to search for that, that's might be some useful tips. But basically, I started recording it myself, and then as the game started, the clarity of its design, it became clear that it was going to be actually a lot more work. Mainly what was the issue was that items could be put on any surface in the room, and we wanted that detail of whatever surface you put something on sounded like that surface, because you don't do much else in this game, except for pick stuff up and put it down. So that part has to sound amazing. And so it was like, well, the more detail we put into it, the better it was, right? And so what ended up happening is I had to ask my wife, Angela, to help me with this, because it was too big of a job for me to handle myself. And I had to basically show her how to do some of the recording process, show her how some of the technical stuff was set up. But then at one point, she kind of just went, "Yep, I got this. Let me run with it." And she started getting all the items together. We set up this sort of Foley recording studio, and in our basement, and she basically recorded all the items in the game over a period of about 3 months. So, yeah, it was a lot of work. It was a huge amount of work, and she, she's really good with organizing large amounts of data like this. Probably because, well, first of all, she's super smart. But secondly, she's worked at Electronic Arts in the past, doing a lot of like play-by-play for sports games, which is all about thousands of files and naming and conventions and all this sort of stuff. So this was, definitely her cup of tea, right? So, um, so I was lucky that she then took it over, and so we set up a Foley studio in a spare bedroom, and we had all these items from both our house, and we bought some items, and had to get things that like bench tops and desks and what have you, all the different surfaces that we had to have. And she diligently went through every object in the game, or most objects of the game, and recorded it on each of these surfaces. While she was doing that, she did notice a lot of repetition, and we started to notice, like, actually, we don't need to record absolutely everything. What we need to do is do some really clever categorization of things. And so, quite simply, instead of cup one, or big cup, small cup, whatever, it was ceramic light, ceramic heavy. So anything made out of ceramic would use the ceramic sound, and anything made out of plastic would use the plastic sound. So all of a sudden, We just needed to have really good sort of archetype sounds. And then the other thing we noticed is that when you put things on a soft surface, they almost all sound the same. It doesn't matter what you put. You'll notice the difference between a light object and a heavy object. But if you put a metal thing on a pillow and a wooden thing on a pillow, it just sounds like two things hitting a pillow. You know what I mean? So we saved a lot of time with stuff like that.
Now, the Melbourne International Games Week starts this week. How are you involved, Jeff?
I'm very involved for this one. I'm involved with APRA. We're doing two major events. One is called Song Hubs, which is going to be basically 4 audio teams are going to have the opportunity to produce both music and sound design for a game that is in a prototype stage or early stages of development. And the lucky attendees that have been chosen will be mentored by some well-known, very experienced composers like Chris Larkin, and sound designers like Anne-Marie Weber, and a bunch of other really interesting and talented and experienced composers and sound designers. So that's Song Hubs. That starts the week before High Score. So that starts on, I think, the 26th of this month, which is next week actually. And after Song Hubs is High Score, and I have the honor of giving the closing keynote at that, which will be my first. A first for me to be doing that, which is so the pressure's on. And High Score is great. It's a great event because it focuses on audio for games, and it's not just music. It's music, and it's sound design, and it's voice acting, and it's also about the technology, the implementation of audio into games. I know a colleague of mine, friend of mine, Nathan Cummins. He transcribes music from MIDI files into sheet music so that live musicians can play stuff. And he's apparently giving a talk as well, which would be great, because it'd be nice to see more live musicians used in game music. And there's a bunch of people giving talks on the biz dev side of things. So High Score is going to be a really cool event, and it's been going for the last few years. I think it went virtual over the sort of lockdown time, but it's back in person, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in game audio. And I'm helping show a game at PAX. It is a sneak preview. It's another Witchbeam game. So this is the next game after Unpacking, and it's called Tempopo. And it is a really interesting and fun game. So it's a very chilled puzzle game where you rescue musical flowers from floating sky gardens. And so what happens is you've got this playing field, which is literally floating in the sky, and you basically there are these flowers that are kind of singing to you or playing instruments to you. The flowers even look a little bit like musical instruments. And you have these little characters called Tempopo, and they bounce around, and wherever you've put an instruction to move or turn or jump or whatever, when they land on that instruction, they do the thing you want them to. And so what happens is that you place all these instructions on the playing field, and then you hit play, and the music goes from sort of thinking, relaxing music to kind of boppy tunes, and now the whole world animates in time to the music, and the little flowers sing and play in time with the background music, and it all executes in time to the music. It's not really a rhythm game per se, because it's more of a puzzle game about moving things around, but it's presented in a rhythmic and musical fashion. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to go, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of a good technical challenge, because we're getting the music and the animations to line up really accurately. So it's really convincing that these little flowers are playing the music. So
thank you so much for joining me on Lightmap today, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And
no worries.
congratulations on the success of Unpacking, and good luck with everything in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
SIFTER is produced by Nicholas Kennedy, Fiona Bartholomaeus, Daniel Ang, and Adam Christou. Mitch Lowe is senior producer, and Gianni Giovanni is our executive producer. Thanks to Omny Studio for their support of SIFTER's 3 podcasts. You can find links to everything we talked about on our website, which is sifter.com.au. You can read more about the games and guests we've featured. Please share this show. It is the #1 free thing you can do to support us. Word of mouth is really important to indie podcasts like this, so let your friends know if you reckon they'll enjoy it. Send them a link, make it easy for them to take part in the show, and we'll love you forever for it. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. See you on the next episode of Lightmap.